Good morning, everyone. So we're back to our 8 a.m. start, which I know everybody loves. Hopefully you got coffee and we're ready to go. We got a few things to get through today. First off, I'm Jim Gilmore from New York, and I'll be running the policy board meeting today, and with great help of our policy board director. Policy, ISFMP policy. I need coffee. Yeah, and we just promoted Tony. And Pat Kelleher will be helping whatever. So with part of this meeting today, which we'll get into in a while. First off is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? We do have, under other business, there's been a request for an update on SHAD and an update on the horseshoe crab assessment, so we'll be adding those. Any other additions to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll adopt those by unanimous consent. Secondly, we have approval of the proceedings from the February 2018 meeting, which was in your briefing package. Are there any changes to those proceedings? Seeing none, we'll adopt those by consent. I won't go into the long speech. I'll just say, is there any public that would make any comments on items not on the agenda? At this time, you could raise your hand and come up to the public mic. Okay, seeing none, we'll get right into the first action item. Well, actually, not an action item, just a report, which is an update from the executive committee, which we had yesterday morning. And hold on to get my computer to work.
It needs coffee.
Okay, so yesterday morning we met and had several items that I'll go over briefly now. First off, we had the review of the FY19 budget. Pat Kelleher is chairman of the Oversight Committee, and he and Laura did a brief update. There's a bunch of details on the budget itself in a long document. Generally, there's not a lot of changes from the 2017 budget. Some slight tweakings here and there. There's some increases, some decreases. And a lot of it depends on final numbers from the feds in terms of what our budget's going to look like. There's some adjustments under different tax, like APIS. Some of the numbers are going down because of efficiency in the operation. Overall, the good news is there's a surplus right now from the previous year. I won't go into a lot of detail. We'll probably see if Pat has anything to add, and Laura's here if anybody has any questions. But generally, we're in good shape on the budget for this year, actually, because of some increases from the feds, whatever, we're actually, council and commission funding is actually looking like more positive these days. I don't know, Bob, do you want to add anything to that, or? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think some of the fruits of everyone's labor that have gone up to Capitol Hill and talked to their elected officials about the council and commission line in the budget are starting to pay off. As most folks know, the ASMFC, the Atlantic Coastal Act, is funded through a council and commission line, which is all the funding for the 8 regional councils, as well as ASMFC, the Gulf States Commission, Pacific States Commission. And that line was increased this year, and with that increase was some language that directed NOAA Fisheries to allocate that increase to the 3 commissions. And the reason they did that was because the 3 commissions haven't had an increase since about 2008. So it's been about a decade since the funding for ASMFC and the other 2 commissions had gone up. So there's about an increase of $1.6 million. Some of that's going to go to an international commission, and then the remainder is going to be allocated between the 3 interstate commissions, us, the Gulf, and the Pacific. We don't know the exact numbers, so even if it's divided in equal thirds, it may be up to $500,000 coming to the ASMFC through the Atlantic Coastal Act. And if there is a significant chunk of money, the commissioners will need to decide what you guys want to do with that. Should that money go straight out to the states for in-state projects and to cover budget shortfalls that you have, or do you want to fund a few specific projects with that through ASMFC, or do you want to have some of it come to our office and hire another staffer of some sort, or what do you want to do? But we don't know the amount yet, and once we know the amount, then we'll seek input probably through the executive committee on what to do with the increase. So does that sound good, Jim?
Yes, perfect, Bob. So are there questions about the budget or anything that anyone wants to raise at this point? Again, we can, Laura's around if you have detailed questions. She'll be around to ask them, but is there any other questions on that? Okay, seeing none. The next item we talked about was it was an issue regarding proxies serving as officers. Back in the February meeting, we were recognizing that there's been quite a lot of turnover in the commission in the last few years in commissioners. And we still were concerned about, did we have people with experience that could raise to the level of officers? So, and it's an issue that's been in the past is that we've had some long-term serving proxies, ongoing proxies that actually would probably make some decent officers for the commission. So at the February meeting, we actually put a motion up to actually include proxies for consideration, ongoing proxies, as potential for officers. Permanent proxies were always allowed, but ongoings were not included. However, between February and now, we had gotten some legal advice on this, and it turns out that we were really running afoul of the compact, the rules and regulations that the language, which lawyers could probably argue, but it seemed pretty clear to us, was that the officers had to be elected from the body, and the body really turns out to be commissioners. And I think we pretty much agreed with that at the executive committee yesterday, that it really has to be a commissioner, or it has to be a permanent proxy. So we had a motion yesterday to rescind that original motion we did in February, and we're back to the rules where when we're getting to officer elections, that it will have to be either one of the sitting commissioners or a permanent proxy for a commissioner, because essentially they do sit permanently at the table. So that's where we're kind of back to the rules we had prior to February. So any questions on that? The good news is, I think with some of the new commissioners that have come up, we actually have some good talent coming up through the ranks, so hopefully we will run into any issues, and we'll have great leadership as we move forward. Okay. Next item was discussion on commissioner conflict of interest. I actually have Bob help me a little bit on this one, but there is some issues. Any of our commissioners in a financial disclosure form have to look at if they have greater than a 10% interest in a particular fishery, whatever, they have to essentially disclose that and possibly recuse themselves from activities on the commission when we're deliberating. However, there is some newer commissioners and newer proxies, whatever, that got involved that sort of had maybe not that direct contact, but they were affiliated with organizations that maybe had that. There was a couple of examples that had come up that were of concern, and they've been resolved now, so the issue is really not before us. But it did raise some questions with some of the membership about, is this appropriate to have these people on the commission, or even deliberating in particular species boards. So it seems to have resolved itself now. At this point, we're not going to do any action on it other than to monitor it, that if we have issues that come up with these secondary organizations, whatever, and that maybe there is not objective representation by an individual, that we'd have to address it. In both of the examples I'm thinking about that we had, that both of them, it seemed to be the individuals were operating very objectively, whatever, but it was cause for some concern by some of the membership. So you want anything to add to that, Bob? Okay. Anyway, so nothing to do on this one other than, again, to watch it. We're getting more and more, I guess, diverse, and our overlap with the council is getting, more and more involved. As species are moving north, we're getting a lot of overlap, so we just have to pay attention to, how we're doing our business and make sure we follow our rules. Next one is we discussed the appeals process. I think when I agreed to be vice chairman, the appeals process was something that never was used, and unfortunately now it seems to be getting used at every meeting. With that, and I think it's logical, is that that we've been using it now. There's been some discussion about criteria. So any of the appeals, if you're not familiar with them, really have to fall under one of 5 criteria, I think it is, and before it can be valid. And there's been some discussion about that, and particularly, I think it's being looked at right now. Jay McNamee is kind of leading that charge right now. And the first thing they're looking at was really, was it 3? Number 3, correct. Insufficient, inaccurate, and incorrect application of technical information. That needs a little bit of work, whatever, in terms of what it means, and maybe some better definition of how that would be applied. So Jay is leading an effort right now with some other folks in the commission to come up to maybe some suggestions on how to improve that to make it more understandable, more useful, and easier for people to deal with. So he's going to be doing some effort that maybe bring back during the August meeting that we can start discussing, and hopefully improve the appeal process. So hopefully we're going to get away from the appeal process, but if we are getting more into it, we'll have better guidance on it. Do you want to add anything to that, Jay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not really. I think you covered it. We've got a draft set of criteria for that. Criteria number 3. We'll work through that. We'll get it out for people to take a look at and follow up on that in August.
Thanks. And thanks again for volunteering on all these things you volunteer on, Jay. I think if we were paying you on an hourly basis, we'd probably bankrupt the commission. Any other questions on that topic? Stay tuned. It's going to get interesting, I think. Next topic was to discuss the future scope of MRIP and APIS activities, and Mike Kaol and Bob Beal did an overview on that. APIS has been very successful that it's been put into the states. We see good improvements in the data collection. And, that's the whole idea is that MRIP's only going to be as good as the data we get and that we put into the system. So APIS seems to be working very well in all the states. We're getting glowing recommendations. The fishermen, I know from my state, are very happy that they actually see people now. We used to get a lot of comments about we've never been interviewed, we've never seen anybody, and not only that, they're seeing people now, but there's, the people that are doing this understand the program, they understand fisheries, so it seems to be really working well. So with that, there's opportunities for the state to get more involved with MRIP and even get involved with more of the survey, specifically for the for-hire telephone survey, large pelagic intercept and biological surveys, and also continued coordination with GARFO and I don't. What is that acronym? That one, SAFIR.
It's my understanding. I think I can't tell you all the actual words in the acronym, but it's a Southeast for-hire effort to improve the monitoring of for-hire vessels in the Southeast.
I'm going to update the acronym sheet in the manual. Anyway. So anyway, with these is an opportunity for the states to get more involved with this and hopefully improve the data, all the data that's going into it. Again, since if we build on that success of the APIS program, that the better data will give us better MRIP results, and hope to God we start seeing some better MRIP results. And again, I think part of the problem is with some of that data, the volatility in MRIP is maybe because of the data that's going into it. So the ACCSP folks will be, putting together some information. They're going to actually be putting more details out, and cost in particular, about what this would mean for different states and different parts of the program. Mike Kaol indicated that if people have questions about this and the details of this, that he's available to talk more about it, and hope more and more of the states will get involved with this and improve the data. Any questions on that? Okay, we're cranking right along. Next one is the future meetings of the annual meetings that Laura gave us an update on. The next meeting is in someplace in the north. Oh, it's New York. We actually have plans of people who had been around 15 years ago. We had done it at the Roosevelt Hotel. We're going to be at the same location, except for this time, because Laura is so convincing, they gave us the entire second floor, the main balcony, it's a ballroom. It looks like something out of The Great Gatsby. It's a beautiful place, whatever. We are going to have, early lessons on how to survive in New York. Pat Kelleher says he's not coming unless he gets his own bodyguard. But trust me, I worked in Manhattan for many, many years and never had an issue, and it's a great place to be. We're still working on, the specific venues that we're going to be doing for the different actions, but I think it'll be a great time, and we are looking forward to it. Then in the following year is New Hampshire, and the delegation from New Hampshire was talking about it last night. I think they're going to rent a cruise ship is what they said, right? They're going to have. We're going to do the fishing contest from a cruise ship. No, only kidding. And as I think it was 15 years ago, they were very nervous about following New York, and I understand they outdid New York, so I think that'll be a great thing too. 2020 we're in New Jersey, and then in 2021 we're in North Carolina. So once again, we'll have great annual meetings as we go forward. Any questions on that? Okay. The next item we had was Dennis Abbott had raised an issue from the LGA committee, and it was really some concerns over maybe some of the recent activities going on about how we might be getting away from our core. And I think there was a lot of discussion at the LGA with concerns about I think the commissioners that have been here a longer period of time saw maybe a more cooperating body, and maybe we were getting away from that, and that we should, start paying attention to that. Do you want to add anything? You want to talk a little bit? Okay. And I think it was pretty much agreed at the executive committee that, there is some maybe loss. We're in new times, and there's a lot of new challenges in communication and the information we get. We have fake news that we have to react to now, and it's that I had a meeting, a really overly attended meeting a few weeks ago, and some of the misinformation that people got from websites and the internet was just crazy, and just gets people to react too much to it, and I think we're reacting to that. But there was some, core procedures and things we did in the past that actually helped us, make better decisions, or make more cooperative decisions, I guess, for lack of a better term. So what we're going to do, and as a start, is myself and Pat, along with some of the former chairmen, are going to maybe sit down and maybe tap into some of the former commissioners from a time gone by, to sit down and talk to them about this and see if we can get a perspective of how things maybe worked years ago, and maybe we can still tap into some of those ideas to help us move forward and maybe get back into a more cooperative stance of where we are maybe right now. So that's where we're proceeding with that. We're going to move ahead on that and take some questions. Tom Foti.
Yeah, one of the things we discussed at that meeting is the change in the information systems that we dealt with 25, 27 years ago, 30 years ago. 30 years ago, we had mostly newspapers, and the people that covered the outdoor were actually reporters that finally got the job they wanted all their life by doing fishing and hunting and things like that, but they were reporters. They looked for information, they wanted science, and they basically put in. And they weren't worried about how many hits they got on their web pages. They could make more advertising money. And that's what's part of this process that's changed over the years. The people that do a lot of the blogs and things like that don't pay their due diligence to what's going on, or don't put the information out in the tables and the charts and things like that. And also, they're looking to create controversies because that means more traffic to their web pages instead of just getting information out. So the commission has to look at, I think, at better ways of communicating. We put out a good newspaper. It's got to get more widely distributed. We got to look at other means of getting out, maybe through Facebook and things like that. So we're a presence there to basically counteract the bad news and the fake news that does go out about what we're doing. The same thing with the Mid-Atlantic Council. It's just, there's a lot of bad information out there, and we have to deal with it.
Thanks, Tom. Any other comments or questions on that? Again, I think and hopefully for my tenure as chairman, we need to solve our issues here at this table. And we got too much, and I'm as guilty as anyone of having, outside influence, start directing what we're doing. But the more we solve here, the better off we're going to be, because once it leaves this body, I think if it goes to other places, none of us are going to like what comes out of that. So, and that's from experience. So again, we'll start this little group discussion, whatever, and we'll be reporting back to the body as we move forward. And if anybody has suggestions or wisdom, we'd be happy to take it and have more dialogue on this. And again, hopefully get back to some of the good practices we had in the past. The next update was an addition was over a lawsuit that we have on whale take. Bob, do you want to just make a couple of comments on that?
Sure, I'm happy to. The commission was sued over the interactions of right whales, which everyone knows are extremely endangered, and there were 18 mortalities over the last year. And the commission was sued by an individual in Massachusetts. We've got until Tuesday to respond to that initial suit. Sean Donahue, the commission's attorney, is working on the initial response. There are two other lawsuits that were filed by environmental organizations, Conservation Law Foundation, Oceana, Humane Society, et cetera. And those lawsuits did not name ASMSC. They named the federal government Secretary of Commerce. So there are a total of 3 lawsuits kind of swirling around right now that involve right whales and lobster gear. We're going to, the commission, the one that was filed against the commission, cites a number of ESA charges or violations that the plaintiff thinks that were made. A couple of those only apply to federal agencies, which ASMSC has argued successfully in court. We are not a federal agency. So, we getting dismissed from some of the Section 7 ESA may be easier than some of the other things in there. We'll have to see how it goes. So we'll be filing our response, as I said, on Tuesday. We will keep you posted. There is some effort to potentially bind all 3 of these lawsuits, excuse me, into one lawsuit. There's pros and cons to that. Since it's an ESA lawsuit, if whoever loses that lawsuit may have to pay the legal fees for whoever wins that lawsuit. So, if ASMSC is pulled into the other lawsuits, and there's Conservation Law Foundation and a number of other big entities there, it could be pretty high legal bills. So there's some concerns there. There has been some talk in the northern states on how they, do they want to submit anything relative to these lawsuits as well. So there's a fair amount of legal action going on with right whales and lobster gear and ship strikes and everything else. The ASMSC's response to the lawsuit is not going to trivialize the importance of right whale protection. Obviously, it's a big deal. The whales are in tough shape, and the really high level of mortality with 0 calves born last year that anyone has seen anyway. So when you've got a small population, a lot of losses, and no new entrants, you end up with a pretty delicate situation. So the commission's not saying that this isn't an important issue. It is an important issue, but we are saying that we're moving in a lot of fronts to modify lobster fishing and have taken steps that reduce traps and some other things in the water. So happy to answer any questions, but that's the update on legal activity for now.
Thanks, Bob. Any questions for Bob? Okay, seeing none. The last thing we had at the executive meeting was the was actually Bob's performance. He failed miserably. We have to fire him. So Bob's doing an outstanding job. Everyone agreed that we're really fortunate to have Bob. He works his rear end off and really keeps the commission running it makes everyone else's job, my job, everybody's job very easy. So Bob, another glowing performance, and keep up the good work. So that concluded the executive committee meeting. So if there's no questions on any of that, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is where I'm going to have to step away from the microphone. We're going to hear consider the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York appeal to the addendum 30 for black sea bass. Since I'm an appellant, I have to step away from the seat for a little while, and Pat Kelleher is going to take over and run this part of the meeting. So, Pat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We'll get right into this. I think Tony has a presentation for the policy board. We'll go through that now. Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We received an appeal from the northern states, which include Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York, appealing the summer flounder black sea bass addendum 30 to the FMP. Just as a reminder how the appeal process works, appeal is reviewed by commission leadership within 15 business days. Typically, that's the current chair, vice chair, and past chair, but since the current chair was one of the appellants, we asked the past vice chair, I think, or maybe it's past vice chair, which was Robert Boyles, to join the group. So he added in with us and with Pat Kelleher and Doug Grout. The appeal has to be justified within specific criteria, which we did talk about a little bit earlier today. Those criteria can include a decision is not consistent with the FMP, there's a failure to follow the process, there's insufficient, inaccurate, incorrect application of technical information, the historical landings period is not adequately addressed, and the management actions resulting in unforeseen circumstances or impacts. So just a little bit about the black sea bass fishery and sort of the process that we go through to set recreational regulations, because Addendum 30 does look at the recreational regulations for black sea bass. In December, the Commission meets jointly with the Mid-Atlantic Council, and the Council has within their plan the ability to do coast-wide measures. But for the past couple of years, what they've done is set a coast-wide measure that might not actually meet the RHL, because we know that the northern states are going to set more restrictive measures than those that are contained within the federal waters regulations, and that the combination of the federal water regulations and the northern states regulations combined will meet the coast-wide RHL each year. We do put in a backstop just in case those regulations are not implemented by the northern states. And this year, those backstop measures were 14 inches, 5 fish from May 15 through September 15th. The black sea bass stock is not overfished, and overfishing is not occurring, and the biomass is roughly around 250%. So Addendum 30 is approved in February of 2018, and it established the process to set the regulations for this year. Since 2012, the recreational fishery was managed using an ad hoc regional approach. The northern states and New Jersey individually crafted management measures that adjusted harvest by the same percentage, and the southern states set their regulations consistent with the federal waters. This approach allowed the states some flexibility in setting measures, but some states had expressed a need for more equity and accountability in managing the harvest to the catch limits. The addendum set forth to try to meet more equity and accountability as we went through. The addendum set management regions. Those regions were defined as Mass through New York. New Jersey was its own region within itself, and then Delaware through North Carolina. Accounting for these geographic differences in the stock and the fishery, the Addendum 30 used a combination of exploitable biomass information from the stock assessment and historical harvest to try to regionally allocate the RHL to those three regions. The allocation was based on a hybrid of the options that were actually presented in the draft addendum. There was two time frames in the addendum. One was a 10-year time frame and another was a 5-year time frame. What we did, it was average those two time frames together at the board meeting, because there was not consistency to choose one option or the other. To improve accountability, the states within each region were collectively responsible for managing their harvest to that regional allocation through cooperative development of recreational measures. And to increase consistency, each state was required to or each region set a standard set of measures that each state in the region would follow. And that included that no state could increase more than 1 inch in their minimum size and could not increase or decrease their possession limit by more than 3 fish. And then the addendum also initiated the development of a new process for evaluation and specifications of the measures against the ACL, the annual catch limit, which aimed to provide more flexibility or more year-to-year stability in the management measures. So the northern region states were appealing the allocation of the RHL to the regions. And I will let the northern states get into the details of that, the specificity of each of the criterion in which they did their appeal. But just to note that during the call, the leadership did determine that the appeal met the qualifying guidelines under criterion 1 and 2, the decision not being consistent with the FMP, and criterion 3 being incorrect application of data. And so therefore it is, those two issues are here before the policy board for your consideration today. Leadership did determine that the appeal did not meet the qualifying guidelines under criterion 5, which is unforeseen circumstances. The draft addendum had presented a wide range of management options within the document. Some of those options contained more restrictive measures than those that were approved by the board. And so therefore, we felt that the public did have the opportunity to see what types of measures and the impacts of those measures would be, even though it wasn't necessarily the option that was eventually chosen. So today, the policy board will discuss the criterion 1 and 3 and determine if direction to the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Management Board is warranted for direction under the measures that are being asked for by the northern states under the appeal. And then one thing to note, David is going to go through the northern states appeal in just a minute, but just to sort of lay the groundwork for how we got to a point in this decision process. Due to the intricacies of how we set federal measures and how the northern region sets their measures, we typically will tell the NOAA fisheries that the states have collectively brought together regulations or put together regulations and implemented these regulations that will meet the RHL. We typically do that by the end of April. And because we haven't been able to do that, and because the appeal came forward, NOAA Fisheries had informed us that they were going to put together or put out the backstop measures. Those backstop measures are unpalatable to some of the states on the coast because those states don't see fish that are of the size in the backstop measures. And in addition, we had heard from some states that they were considering going out of compliance. And an out of compliance finding would also put NOAA Fisheries in the situation where they would also have to implement those backstop measures. So we started to talk and work with all of the states to figure out a way to avoid those backstop measures. And David will get into that a little bit more, but that's to sort of set us up to why we got there. So David is next.
David, before we go to you, are there any questions of Tony for her review? Adam?
So, Tony, there was a huge change that took place regarding the implications of the measures that were initially proposed in the document. I don't know if you could put up Table 4 from the appeal that shows what the proposed impacts were of those measures, and ultimately what the impacts were when the final data came out. Can you just touch on, so that everybody's on the same page at the policy board, how, quite frankly, New Jersey in particular, which is really what's caused a lot of the issue here, went from being the most negatively impacted state based on the decision that was put forth by the previous decision by the management board to the most favorable position? So I think that's really important to the discussion here.
Adam, I don't disagree that that's important to the discussion, I think, but what I would like to do is just before we get into that level of detail, I want David, on behalf of the northern states, to be able to present the case in regards to the appeal, and then we'll get into that type of detail. What I'd like to do now is just stay focused. Any kind of overriding questions or clarifications from Tony's presentation? Seeing none, I will give the floor to David Pierce, who will present on behalf of the northern states. David?
Yeah, thank you, Pat. Some of the questions and concerns just offered by Adam should be addressed in my presentation, which, again, as you've indicated, is on behalf of the other states, New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. This is not a Massachusetts appeal. This is a collective appeal of the northern region. Now, all board members have received, and we assume you've had an opportunity to read our appeal of the decision pertaining to Addendum 30. And again, I have to thank Tony for her introductory remarks. They were right on point. Much appreciated. I'm not giving the presentation at the moment, so hold off on that. Okay. Each state has contributed to and have agreed to the appeal language. It's a lengthy appeal, very well documented, and frankly, very well put together. And I know that because of the response that we received from the ASMFC leadership. The leadership really put a lot of time into our appeal and provided us with a very well done, a very frank response, and we much appreciated the fact that that amount of time was put into it, and the letter that we received was quite comprehensive, and the letter did agree, the leadership did agree that two of our appeal criteria have been met. So here we are, giving a presentation to this appeal, to this policy board. You all have a letter, the letter from Vice Chair Pat Kelleher, that again provides all of the details specific to our appeal and why it should be heard. Our appeal details why New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts disagree with the approach that was adopted through Addendum 30, and we explain why we believe that approach is the incorrect approach to use. Now, recall that one motivation for this addendum was the documented shift in black sea bass distribution from the south to the north, from the west to the east, due to warming waters in recent years. ASMFC is well aware of distribution shifts. Clearly, much time has been spent by ASMFC members on this important issue. And this is evident from a February 2018 draft white paper that everyone has seen and everyone has discussed, and is entitled Management Policy and Science Strategies for Adapting Fisheries Management to Changes in Species Abundance and Distribution Resulting from Climate Change. A very well done product of this organization that should serve as a basis for many of our future decisions about allocation of stocks from the south to the north, from the west to the east, or vice versa. Now, we noted in our appeal that increased black sea bass abundance and availability in the north is consistent with a growing resource and expanded age structure, and with a growing body of scientific research supporting a northward shift in the species distribution caused by climate change. In our appeal, we note a number of resources, references that provide the science behind this particular statement that we have provided in our appeal. By 2015, 87% of the exploitable biomass was estimated to be from New York through Massachusetts. Yet under the addendum, the recreational allocation for the North region is just 61%. That's 26% less than the 87% of the exploitable biomass found in the northern area. We also noted that the commercial allocations to the states from New York to Massachusetts was just 33% of the coast-wide quota. So now I've got a brief presentation providing our appeal and the desired outcome, and after I'm through, I'll describe a very recent decision by the 4 states in the northern region regarding our appeal. It's a decision that we reached after consideration of what Tony just described, what the regional administrator, what NOAA Fisheries will be obliged to do if we cannot leave this meeting with some understanding, their understanding, what the states are going to put in place for 2018. If we can't do that, then the default kicks in, and as noted by Tony, that default is very unappealing to the vast majority of all the states. So it's in our best interest to come to some agreement today, and we believe we have a way to reach agreement, and that will be provided in a motion that I'll be making on behalf of the 4 states after my presentation is concluded. So. Second slide, please. So once again, Addendum 30, regional allocation of the recreational harvest limit. The 3 regions, Massachusetts through New York, then New Jersey as a separate region, and then Delaware through North Carolina. We used, that is, the Species Board used exploitable biomass and historical harvests as a basis for the options that were provided in the addendum. And the time frame for allocation, the options that were discussed and analyzed, 2006 through 2015, and then 2011 through 2015. When all was said and done, after the Species Board discussed the options, a decision was made on a 6-4 vote, I believe, that the average allocation should be provided using the two time frames. This basically is the reason for the basis of the Northern Region appeal. Next. So the justification for the appeal. First, the decision is not consistent, is inconsistent with the FMP. We believe that the outcome is inconsistent with Addendum 30 objective. It's inconsistent with the FMP objectives. Also, as a second justification for the appeal, and again, the leadership of ASMFC believed that the justifications were there, warranted our bringing it forward to the Policy Board, insufficient application of technical information. And what I'm going to note now is a significant change that was made in the analyses in the New Jersey 2017 harvest estimate. And then, of course, regarding the insufficient application of that information, we believe that stock redistribution caused by climate change was not sufficiently addressed. Next. All right, the first one, the first reason, first justification. Inconsistent with the addendum objective. The addendum objective, one of them anyways, is to reduce the growing regulatory inequities. And this table highlights the fact that under the ad hoc approach that we've used for many years, Massachusetts through New Jersey, we had repeated cuts. And Delaware through North Carolina, largely status quo. And you can see that in the first row, 2010 coastwide, the number of days, the minimum size, the bag, and then in 2017, Massachusetts through New York, once again, the season, the minimum size, and the bag. The point here is that when that the 2018 target has resulted in the need for rule changes in 2018 that creates the 11.71% cut in the harvest for Massachusetts through New York, yet New Jersey in 2017, 47.71% increase. So that's an indication of the growing regulatory inequity that has occurred, and now the need for us, and we make the claim through the appeal, to address this growing regulatory inequity. Next, please. Inconsistent with the FMP objectives. The other objective is to prevent overfishing and is to improve yield. 2016 benchmark stock assessment results noted that overall underfishing. Massachusetts through New York, that subunit, which of course is now the region that we represent, there has been underfishing. Yet New Jersey through the North Carolina subunit, overfishing. What we seek are regulations that are compatible between the state and federal government, that should be effectively enforced, and they should be minimal, and that's not what is happening. For 7 years, since the Massachusetts and New York and federal regulations were aligned, now this larger northern region cut is driving us further apart from the federal rules, and it's becoming even harder to align the rules within the region, such as in the northern region. Next. Insufficient application of harvest data. This is an aspect of the analyses of the work that was done that perhaps has not been appreciated by most states, and that is the New Jersey 2017 Wave 3 harvest estimates. They were smoothed. Early on in our discussions, it was projected that there would be a 1.41 million pound harvest in Wave 3. I'm sorry, that's not Wave 3. It was projected that for the entire year, it would be 1.41 million pound harvest. Well, that then was revised. That number was revised downward to about 0.75 million pounds, and that occurred as a consequence of the smoothing of that New Jersey 2017 Wave 3 harvest. Management implications for 2018, well, let's go to the table. Early on, the projected 2011 through 2015 time frame had Massachusetts through New York at a minus 3.64%. New Jersey, as noted by Adam, was looking at, was faced with a 30.27% reduction. Delaware through North Carolina, about a 4.69% increase. The projected averaging approach that was used early on, before the smoothing, resulted in a greater need for a reduction in the region, the northern region, 10.02%. New Jersey, not so much of a reduction, but it's still significant, 21.69%. The Delaware through North Carolina amount, it went up to 19.39%. Now we get to the actual averaging approach, where we smoothed, where the data was smooth for New Jersey in Wave 3. That then resulted in a rather dramatic change in the amount of cuts, or the amount that would be gained. In the northern region, that resulted in a slightly increased amount of reduction, minus 11.71%, and that's contrasted with New Jersey gaining rather dramatically, going from a minus 21% to a gain of about 47%. Delaware through North Carolina, it increased from 19 to 21.83%. So we made the point, and we continue to make the point, that if the actual time frame had been used, the more recent years representing a change in distribution, as noted by all the scientific publications referenced in our appeal, that the reduction for the Massachusetts through New York area would be minus 5.45%. New Jersey still results in an increase, 30.63% as opposed to 46%. Delaware through North Carolina, not so much of an increase, from not 21%, but up to 6.83%. So our point here is that the 2011 through 2015 time frame emerges as a more equitable approach for 2018 management. Next. Insufficient application of climate science. Once again, this organization has discussed climate change quite often, and referencing documents, scientific publications put out by the Northeast Fisheries Science Center in particular. Climate change has caused a northward shift in the distribution of black sea bass, and it has resulted in an increased productivity in the northern regions. So it's supported by those two papers referenced on the slide. And also, it's to be noted, and everyone's aware of this, the 2011 year class is to be repeated. That is, it's a very strong year class, stronger perhaps than the 2015 year class. The figures on the lower part of the slide demonstrate or describe the increase in exploitable biomass for the northern subunit and also for the southern subunit, but you can see that in the northern subunit, the increase in exploitable biomass has increased rather dramatically in contrast to the somewhat larger increase in the southern subunit. What I need to call to your attention is the y-axis. It's a bit deceiving if we just look at that without considering the size of the numbers on the y-axis. The northern subunit goes from 0 up to 16,000 metric tons, and then on the right-hand side for the southern subunit, it goes from about 0 to 8,000 metric tons. So don't be deceived by what you see before you. You have to focus on the numbers and the fact that exploitable biomass in the northern subunit has increased rather dramatically, and it will continue to increase dramatically as a consequence of this 2011 year class. And that will provide for a rather tremendous amount, a large amount of biomass in the northern region. Obviously, some will be in the southern region too, but not as much as in the northern region. Next. So, corrective action. What have we asked for? In the appeal, in the letter that we submitted to ASMFC leadership, we asked that that leadership and then this policy board consider that the 2011 through 2015 time frame was the more appropriate allocation to be used under Addendum 30. Now, earlier on, this is what on the table on the right-hand side, we indicated that the revised allocation, that is using the 2011 through 15 year period, time period, would go from 61% up to about 66%. New Jersey would go from 30%, drop down to 26%. And then Delaware through North Carolina, about 8.4 to 7.36. Now, that's what we offered up. That's what we indicated we wanted to have as a reconsideration of the decision by the board. As a consequence of our understanding Garfo's position on the backstop measures and are not wanting the backstop measures to kick in if the northern states in particular aren't in a position to know what we're going to have as rules for 2018, we decided to meet as a group, the 4 states, and we decided to offer up a somewhat different approach for consideration by this policy board and then hopefully by the species board as well. So this is a revised short-term way to deal with our very specific and legitimate concerns. And again, the backstop is May 15 through September 15, a 14-inch minimum size and a 5-fish limit if we don't know what the measures will be today. So this is very critical. There needs to be an understanding today what the measures will be. Otherwise, it's backstop. Another complication is that there's a challenge of scaling back the harvest. In New Jersey and through North Carolina, there are liberalizations under a lower allocation, so that is a very significant challenge that we need to address, and we can address it. We believe, the northern states believe, the northern region believes we can address it through the solution that we're going to offer up shortly. Next slide. So, the revised short-term corrective action that we offer up to the policy board at this time. We are requesting that we replace the Addendum 30 allocations with an interim approach. And this interim approach considers the expected resource availability of black sea bass in 2018. It addresses the spawning stock biomass decline in the north because this 2015 year class is moving its way through the fishery. And it also addresses the expected recruitment of the 2015 cohort in the South. Again, the 2011 year class is going to be, it is of smaller size. There's smaller minimum sizes in the southern states, therefore there's a need to account for that, and we do that by virtue of what I'm about to describe. What we do with this revised short-term corrective action is not penalize at all, to be respectful, to be understanding of New Jersey and the Delaware through North Carolina position, and that is they wish to maintain their approved 2018 regulations. And we're supporting that as part of this compromise approach that we have developed. As part of this approach, Massachusetts through New York, we're going to develop regulations, and we have them already to present to you. We're going to develop regulations with small liberalization, applying the Addendum 30 regulatory standard guidelines, which is we can adjust our minimum size by 1 inch or adjust the bag up and down by 3 fish. So the table shows in figure form what exactly we have done. The Massachusetts through New York region, the preliminary 2017 harvest estimated to be 2.5 million pounds or so. Now we're accounting for the decline of SSB, spawning stock biomass, of about 16%. That results in a 2018, as we propose it, liberalization of 3.76%. That ends up with a projected 2018 harvest of about 2.2 million pounds. Contrast that with New Jersey. The preliminary 2017 harvest is about 704,000 pounds. We're adding into that projected harvest the assumed 2015 year class, the contribution of that year class, about 74,000 pounds. That results in a proposed liberalization of 46%, which is a very liberal liberalization, 46%. So the projected 2018 harvest now becomes about 1.1 million pounds. For Delaware through North Carolina, preliminary harvest for 2017, about 253,000 pounds. We factor in the contribution of the 2015 year class that is expected still, 21,000 pounds. And that results in a proposed liberalization of rules in 2018 of 12%. Factoring in the February 2018 harvest, a small amount, 5,000 pounds, that results in a projected harvest of 312,000 pounds. So, and here's the bottom line. This is what's most important, certainly from the perspective of the National Marine Fisheries Service and for this policy board, as well as the species board. The projected 2018 harvest with our revised short-term corrective action is 3,666,195 pounds. Contrast that with the RHL, the recreational harvest limit, 3,661,878 pounds. For all practical purposes, it's the same number. Next. All right. I don't think you have a copy of this before you. Let me highlight the fact that the New Jersey to the south, minimum size, possession limit, and open season, they're the same. They're not changing from what was adopted and presented by those states at the last meeting and then adopted. However, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and the Connecticut and the New York measures, these are the measures that we have agreed we would adopt for 2018 as compromise measures. Again, these are the strategies that are consistent with the Addendum 30 criteria of modifying the minimum size by 1 inch or the possession limit by 3 inch. It provides us with the ability, with these particular measures, to achieve with the states in the southern region the RHL for 2018. A very important conclusion and outcome, especially from the services perspective. Next. All right. So the corrective action, this is what we're asking. On the short term, institute the proposed compromise measures for 2018, the ones that I've just described, and then consistent with what the Species Board, what the Summer Flounder, Black Sea Bass, and Scup Board did on the first day of our meeting on Monday, consistent with the discussions that occurred relative to a presentation given by Bob Ballou and others about how to move black sea bass management forward, how to be the approach to use that was supported by the Species Board. We are saying and suggesting that in the long term, there's a need to initiate management actions to address the northward shift in distribution, something that stands to reason. Next. All right. So that is my presentation on behalf of all the states in the northern region. We believe we've accomplished the objectives that we needed to accomplish. We don't put the policy board in a position of having to consider and debate the appeal as originally presented. We're now offering up to you this compromise approach that we worked hard on as a group of 4 states to not impact the southern region, but to provide us with the ability in the northern region to have regulations in place in time to prevent the National Marine Fisheries Service from being obliged to put in place that default measure. And as soon as it's appropriate, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion on behalf of the northern region.
Thank you very much, David. Before you do that, I want to go back to Adam. I believe the table that you referenced was shown in Dr. Pierce's presentation. Do you want to move forward with your question from earlier? Go ahead, Adam.
A portion of it was, and let me begin by saying that this is the summer flounder, black sea bass, Scup Management Board has not had a great track record the last couple years when it comes to recreational management. We've got to take that on our shoulders here, absolutely. Let me just stop right there. I would think that just explaining the time frame that this smoothing approach took place would be helpful for all the members of the policy board to understand that this large liberalization that New Jersey was afforded, which they didn't take. New Jersey wound up significantly reducing from that liberalization in that proposal, went with a much more conservative approach. But I think it's important to understand that the information available to the management board, that table 4 that's up there, that was the decision they made based on that information. Now, how did we go from New Jersey having a 21% reduction to a potential 46% liberalization? I think that's what would be helpful to just have a little bit more discussion about, to explain that and explain the time frame and to explain that that information was not available and why wasn't it available when the board made a decision back in February.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can do my best to explain that, and Jay, if you need to step in and correct me, please do so. So at the time of the board meeting, the TC was still evaluating all of the end of the year harvest levels for each of the states. We did not yet have waves 1 through 6. We only had waves 1 through 5 information. And so after we received waves 1 through 6 preliminary estimates, New Jersey then looked at all of their information. We knew that they had had some outliers in their MRIP information, and consistent with what we have been doing in the past years, in the previous year New York had done this, the TC evaluated those numbers and felt that smoothing was necessary for their wave 3 information, and so New Jersey did smooth the outliers that they had seen coming out of the MRIP harvest estimates for 2018, and that significantly brought down their total harvest levels. And so smoothing did occur between the February meeting and when the board approved the management measures at the March meeting. And so we went from the negative, or the reduction of 22% to the allowable liberalization of up to 46%, which is not, as Adam said, what they took. They took closer to like a 37%, I believe, 39% liberalization. Jason.
Yeah, just one additional thing to add that contributed to the delay, in my view, was the option of smoothing is relatively new, and even into this year, we were still talking about the mechanism. We ended up with this Thompson's Tau method to identify the outlier, and then using Windsorization to actually adjust it. There was another method that we had also discussed, but that was still an item of discussion that I think got settled sort of late as we were working through this process, so that contributed to the delay.
Thank you very much for that. Can I get a sense of the board, how many folks have questions for Dr. Pierce on his presentation? Seeing none, David. Oh, I got one way down in the end. Rob?
I'm way down here, and I was going to, they're not really questions so much as I wanted to comment on this whole situation, if I may, whenever you want me to.
If it's just a comment on the situation, why don't we move forward with putting a motion up on the board, see if we get a second, and then through comments and questions, we'll take those. Rob?
Yeah, it's not so much on the appeal, it's on some of the information that was just presented. That the appeal, I think I understand very well, and I think that there's been a good approach here. And from this situation prior, I think there was definite inequity in the northern states, and I think that was made clear just a few years ago and continued. Massachusetts especially was in that situation with the states that are making the appeal. So I think the really benefit of this is that there's more cohesion there, and that's good. But if I'll take 1 minute. I think this idea of throwing out statistics, that we want to talk about that down the road, and I do want to get that chance. When I hear 87% distribution, I want to make sure that we look at all the surveys. On Monday, you heard me talk about summer flounder and add in information about the other surveys. If it's 87%, that's fine, but we need to be careful about the information that we're using, because it latches on to us as we go forward. And, that's just a situation that we also should not talk about overfishing in a particular sector, or the southern sector, I don't think, because we've been told that, well, with this novel benchmark assessment that was done, you really can't say that those fishing mortality rates should be used for any management purposes. Yet 2 meetings in a row, I see them put forward to us. I think we've got to be careful about that. So it's about what we're doing now is going to be looked at later on, and it should be looked at carefully. I remain skeptical, which means I was taught when I was a scientist that skepticism is healthy, and you wait till you get all the information. And we've been riding the crest of movement of fish, which is fine. They are moving, but we need to be careful about our information and all our sources of information, because I think that we tend to cause our own problems that way. And the last thing I'll say is I was a strong advocate of looking at 2001 to 2010 data, because really the subsidy that was in the appeal of having a subsidy for the southern region, it didn't help much during those years. So, but there were previous years where it was stronger. So again, another fact was the 2015 year class didn't show up. It's in the South. It certainly did in ChessMap, which is a Virginia through Maryland trawl survey. And I think I heard some of the state surveys showed some strong information too. So I have no problem with what David has presented. I have no problem with the appeal. I think it was well done overall. I just think we need to take time and be careful as we go forward about the directions that we're taking on statistics that may not be complete or completely looked at from all sources. So thank you for the time. I know you're probably not happy that I did that, but I thank you.
Thank you for that brief comment. I'm going to go directly to David Pierce. I know he has a motion prepared.
All right, thank you. If we'd be put on the board, thank you. All right. And again, this is being moved not by Massachusetts alone. This is a motion that was agreed to after quite a lot of consultation between New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. So I move, based on the discussion today in the Northern Region Appeal, that the ISFMP Policy Board direct the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Management Board to, number one, address the northward shift in Black Sea bass abundance and distribution by initiating management actions to manage the recreational and commercial fisheries based on the distribution of the resource, along with any other options recommended by the Management Board. The Policy Board requests a new action to address the 2019 recreational fishery, but recognizes that it may take more time to consider options for the commercial fishery. And number two, approve the recreational Black Sea bass regulations for 2018 as presented today.
Great. We have a motion on the board by Dr. Pierce. We have a second by Emerson. We have probably a lot of folks who have comments on this. I'm going to start over here on this side of the room. I thought I saw Eric Reed's hand a second ago. You wanted to second the motion? Well, Emerson does a good job seconding. Plus, I could see his white, with the white beard and hand going. He was very visible. Questions to the motion? Richie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question of process. Does the Policy Board have the authority to implement different regulations on a species, number one? And if we do, have we ever done that in the past?
I'm going to turn that right over to our Executive Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The short answer is, well, there is no short answer. The long answer is the Policy Board really won't be changing the regulations. What the Policy Board will be doing through this motion is remanding something back to the Black Sea Bass Board for them to take action later today to adjust the regulations for 2018, and also charging the Summer Flounder Scup Black Sea Bass Board with the initiating management actions as detailed in part number one of the motion. So, that will be the action that comes out if this motion is approved. Has it happened in the past? There's been other appeals, but most of them have been dismissed or negotiated away before they've gotten to this point. So I can't recall a time when the Policy Board has remanded something back to a management board. But this approach that's in the motion here is directly consistent with the appeals process of the Commission, where the Policy Board hears the appeal, makes a decision, provides direction back to the Species Management Board, and that Species Management Board is then obligated to take action based on the direction from the Policy Board.
Follow up, Richie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I understand number one, and we have done that before. I can't remember what species, but I know we've done that. But number two, aren't we changing the regulations by adopting what Dr. Pierce presented today? Or am I not understanding that?
So the way the motion is constructed, the Policy Board is directing the Black Sea Bass Management Board to address the shift and to approve. So it's a direction from this body to the Management Board to approve the regulation. So to be able to discuss and approve. Any additional questions? Adam.
I heartily endorse the efforts made by the northern states here. I know a lot of the people from the public. I certainly know the commissioners, staff, what they've gone through in trying to do this. I have a tremendous amount of respect and appreciation for the efforts that have been made here. I do see that there are two very different things asked for in these motions. The second item between this policy board and the management board. We need to take action today, or the service is going to implement measures that will effectively shut down the fishery in the majority of states on the East Coast. So I think the second part at this point is something states have agreed to. I see that as lower hanging fruit. The first part of this is something that, through a presentation that was made on Monday, that from a recreational perspective, we're already well on our way to doing. I have a question about the validity of this policy board directing the management board to take action on commercial issues when this appeal was solely about a recreational issue. So I think these are two very different things we need to get at here, and to that end, I'm going to move we divide this question, Mr. Chairman.
You want to go ahead and clarify you're going to make a motion to divide?
That's correct. Let's take these issues up separately.
That is your prerogative.
That's my motion, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion on the board by Adam Nowalski to move to divide items 1 and 2. Is there a second? A second by Dennis Abbott. Discussion on the motion.
Yeah, I had assumed that someone might make a motion to divide, and understandable attempt. However, the Northern Region spent a great deal of time putting together an approach that would get us away from the likely and very unfortunate outcome that could happen today, which would be the default. The Northern Region has wedded number 1 and number 2. The appeal focuses on the northern shift of black sea bass abundance that needs to be addressed recreationally and as well as commercially. So we wedded these two, and we don't believe they can be separated. If they become separated, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, for us to then go forward with these compromised recreational fisheries measures for 2018. And that means, yes.
David, I'm going to step in here.
Right.
Just 1 second. If you could hold, we may have
Sure.
a procedural issue. Can you wait 1 second?
Yeah, want me to go ahead, Pat? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need to check, but I don't believe motions to divide are debatable.
We'll put a hold on this discussion just for 1 minute.
I don't think we should get in the weeds on this, because if we do, we're going to be...
Okay.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. The motion to divide is not debatable, so it stands on its own merit. And I think, you know, what the maker and seconder are trying to accomplish, I think are pretty straightforward.
So we have a ruling that the motion to divide is a non-debatable motion. So with that, is everybody back to the table? We have a motion to divide items 1 and 2, motion by Mr. Nowalski, seconded by Mr. Abbott. All in favor of the, does anybody need time to caucus on this? What's the motion to divide? You need time to caucus? Nobody needs time to caucus. So all in favor of the motion to divide, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Abstentions? 2 null votes? No null.
So motion carries 8 yes, 6 no, 2 abstentions.
Motion carries 8 to 6 to 2 with no abstentions.
No null votes.
No null votes, excuse me.
So we'll
Okay.
take up
Part 1.
first.
So, yeah. So now we will be taking up only Part 1 of the original motion. So any, I'm going to, there's probably going to be a lot of back and forth on this, so I'm going to take for and against and go back and forth on this as far as questions and comments. Anybody who would like to comment in favor of this? Mr. Gilmore.
Well, not in favor. I think maybe the language in the motion is causing some angst, whatever, because we're really just trying to get a path forward in 2019, because we don't want to get back into the same box. But I think maybe the language is, some of the commissioners are seeing this as a little bit too prescriptive. So I would like to offer an amended motion, if that is appropriate, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
A motion to amend to, I'm doing this on the fly, so give me a second, to task the plan development team to develop a white paper that would identify the actions of considering what's the northern shift in the population of black sea bass for future management action. I believe it's a substitution, actually, Mr. Chairman. And Tony, please help me if I don't have all. It's a rough motion, but I think it's trying to get at. So if you've got some suggestions, I'd appreciate it.
Jim, would that be for the commercial fishery you're speaking of?
Yes, I'm sorry, for the commercial fishery,
So
not for the recreational fishery.
Suggest that we say to motion to amend to add that. Can I have the other motion back, Jess? I apologize. So move to substitute, or motion to amend to add to task the plan development team, and then you would still hold on to the policy board requests a new action to address the 2019 recreational fishery. And in the first part of the sentence, it would be initiate management actions to manage and get rid of the recreational and commercial fisheries, and just say based on the distribution of the resource along with any other options recommended by the management board. But so this would then pull in the request from the appeal to look at the distribution of the resource, still allow the summer flounder board to include other types of management, direct the board to start action for the 2019 recreational fishery, and have the plan development team look at how the distributional shifts are impacting commercial fishery distributions.
Yes,
and I will help staff with that.
But I think I'm going to take a minute to get this together.
Why don't we take no, hold on, Tom. Why don't we take just a quick 1-minute recess, and Jim, you come up and help them perfect that motion? We're in a 1-minute recess, Tom. We'll come back. If I could have everybody's attention, please. We're going to stand in recess for an additional 5 minutes. Recess for an additional 5 minutes. Okay, if everybody could please return to your seats. Okay, this is a plea from the state of Maine. A plea from the state of Maine to ensure that we fix this global warming problem, so I don't have to get into black sea bass management. Mr. Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kelleher has thanked me for letting him run this meeting because he's having such a great time. We've essentially wordsmithed it a little bit. So Tony, is it up there now? Okay. So this is my new motion. Let me read it. It's a move to substitute based on discussion today in the Northern Regional Appeal that the ISFMP Policy Board direct the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Management Board to 1, address the changes in Black Sea bass abundance and distribution by initiating management actions to consider management based on the distribution of the resource along with other options recommended by the Management Board. The Policy Board requests a new action to address the 2019 recreational fishery. And 2, task the plan development team to develop a white paper that would identify the actions of considering the changes in the Black Sea abundance for future commercial and recreational management actions. Thank you.
Mr. Reed, second. The second by Mr. Reed. Before we go into discussion on this, I want to take one step back. I know Tony did a very good job in clarifying the role of the policy board as it pertains to appeals, but I'd like the executive director to kind of reiterate the issues associated with the guidance document that we have on appeals to ensure that we're all on the same page, because in the midst of the chaos that was happening up front, we also Bob and I were wrestling with some procedural issues that I think this motion takes care of. So, Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just to clarify and sort of paraphrase right out of the appeals process document, the role of the policy board, once the policy board receives an appeal, is the policy board, if the policy board determines that the existing management program should be modified, it will issue a finding to that effect as well as guidance regarding corrective action to the appropriate species management board. So it's within the purview of this board, if they agree with the appeal, to send something back to the Summer Flounder, Scup, Black Sea Bass Management Board in this instance, and that can be as direct as the policy board needs it to be. And then the subsequent step is that upon receipt of this guidance from the policy board, the management board is obligated to make changes that respond to the findings of the policy board. So, it's a direct, this board has the authority under the appeals process to direct the species board to make changes, and those changes can include specific management measures that have to be adopted by the management board level. And one important thing is that these are only simple majority votes. It's not a 2/3 majority or anything else. It's just a simple majority at the policy board to remand things back to the species board. Then once it gets to the species board, it's a simple majority to implement those changes. So happy to answer any questions, but hopefully that clarifies things.
Thank you, Bob. I think that gives good clarity to the policy board. So with that information at hand and the motion that we have on the board, is there any discussion on the motion? David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I'm going to speak in support of the substitute because I think it addresses most of the concerns that the northern states have voiced. And I'd also point out that it gets to the really crux of the issue that's been discussed by the LGAs and by the executive committee, which is our collective need to settle our differences through dialogue and discussion and consistent with the process and maintain control of the process. We don't need states going out of compliance and threatening to trigger the default measures to disadvantage some region, and I think this motion accomplishes that. So I hope everybody votes for it.
Thank you, David. Any additional questions or comments? Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also just wanted to speak in favor of this. I am much more comfortable with this motion to substitute instead of the original motion. I think it addresses some of the concerns that New Jersey had with the original motion, and I appreciate the Northern Region's consideration and flexibility to include language that addresses our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Any additional comments or questions? David, one last comment?
Yeah, just a really quick point. This motion does not reference the Mid-Atlantic Council, but the Mid-Atlantic Council is a partner in some of these discussions, and so some aspects of this will have to be coordinated with the council, and I just wanted to acknowledge that on the record.
Yeah, thank you, David. I don't think we need to add it to the motion, but I think based on that, the record will be clear. Additional questions or comments? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. I'll quickly read the motion into the record. Move to substitute, based on the discussion today and the Northern Region appeal, that the ISFMP Policy Board direct the Summer Flounder Scup Black Sea Bass Management Board to 1, address the changes in black sea bass abundance and distribution by initiating management actions to consider management based on the distribution of the resource along with any other options recommended by the management board. The policy board requests a new action to address the 2019 recreational fishery. 2, task the plan development team to develop a white paper that would identify the actions of considering the changes in black sea bass abundance for future commercial and recreational actions. Motion by Mr. Gilmore, seconded by Mr. Reed. All those in favor of the motion on the board signify by raising your hand. 16. All those opposed? Abstentions? Null votes? 1 null vote. Motion passes 16-001. Thank you very much. Yeah, so now that is now the main motion. I don't think we... So this is now the main motion, which is the final action. So do we have any additional discussions as it is a final action? I don't believe we need any reason to caucus. All those in favor of this? Are there any objections or nulls? This is a final action, so we have to do a roll call unless there is objections or null votes.
We'll null on this one as well, Mr. Chairman.
So we'll note for the record that North Carolina will be a null vote, and so we will not take a roll call. So with that, all those in favor of the motion on the board as a final action, please signify by raising your hand. Oh, there's no objection. Well, okay, I'll back that off. There's no objection other than the null vote. I'm sorry. So the motion passes with the recognition of a null vote from North Carolina. So that brings us to the part 2 of the motion.
She'll get there.
Yeah. Yeah, Tony has a quick statement.
So this motion deals with the measures that were presented in the PowerPoint by David, and I'm going to ask Jessica to go to my PowerPoint slide, and after the questions, there were 2 slides, one with the measures, just so everyone can see the measures so that they know what you're voting on quickly. These are the proposed measures from the PowerPoint slide that David presented earlier. In addition, there's a second slide just to note on the record that all the states would be able to implement these measures which meet the RHL for 2018. And all of them can be implemented, for the most part, in a very timely fashion. The state of Delaware will take a little bit longer to get their regulations in place, but noted that Delaware does already have last year's regulations in place, and this would only be to change to allow for the opening in the fall. So, Jess, you can go back to the motion.
Great. So this is the second part of the divided motion, and I'm just going to read it quickly and then we'll debate it. Move based on the discussion today that the Northern Region appeal that the ISFMP Policy Board direct the Summer Flounder Scup Black Sea Bass Management Board to approve the recreational black sea bass regulations for 2018 as presented today. So that is the divided motion that was originally presented, the second half that was originally presented by Dr. Pierce. Discussion on the motion that's on the board. Seeing none, is there any objections or null votes to the motion that's on the board? This is a final action. This is a final action, so there are no objections that have been stated for the record. As such, this motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Gilmore, would you please come back to the front of the table? Thank you very much, everybody.
And thank you, Pat, for doing that. That was a fantastic job, and thanks everyone to the policy board for that. All right, we're going to. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
I have one question and one little statement. The first question is, when New Jersey did not do the appeal, because we opened up the appeal, we made a motion to table the appeal because the board met afterwards. So do we need a similar motion on this? That's my first question.
There was never an appeal submitted, so it was nothing that was ever ruled on, okay. So we're okay.
Okay. The second point I will make is the same thing I made at the Summer Flounder board on Monday. There's been an expansion of two stocks that have greatly increased over this period of time, that by 1/3. That is summer flounder and that is black sea bass. When the stock has expanded, it has also expanded its range. Unlike surf clams and a few other species like lobster, when the water got warm, they moved out of our area completely up into New York and up into the canyon, so that's why all my surf fishermen are now fishing out of other areas for surf clams. But the fish did not leave the south. They're still there. I mean, there's been no migration north. They're still able to catch the numbers. So we need to look at this, in a full context of expanding the range. The problem is we've been fishing on smaller quotas than when the stocks were 1/3 the size on both summer flounder and black sea bass than they were 20 years ago. And we should be expanding the quota and the stock, and we wouldn't wound up in all these problems over the thing, because when we try to strangulate a stock, we also, if we basically have a stock that is here, because of rules that we put in precautionary approach and everything else, we say that the stock is here, and so it's smaller than it is, and then we set rules and regulations on that smaller stock. We're basically producing ourselves to failure, because there is more fish out there. So in the period of time that we set on the smaller stock, that for the precautionary approach, we're allowing ourselves to go over all the time needlessly, and not because we don't try to stay within the parameters of that stock that we're basically setting rules on, but the stock is much bigger than we're setting the rules on. It might sound a little confusing, but that's what's been happening over the last 10 years on black sea bass and summer flounder since the reauthorization. So we should still part of that white paper should look at those changes also. That's all I'm asking, Chair.
Yeah, good comments. The dilemma we face is, I think you captured pretty well, so thanks for those comments. Okay, we're going to move on to Lisa Havel's going to do an update on the committee report on artificial reefs, which I'm very excited about, because in New York, not having a reef program for many years, if any of you saw the papers or the documents that were sent around, we've initiated our reef program, and I'm actually in trouble right now because I'm not back doing deployments right now. But we're very excited about it, and so now we're going to be having a good membership back on the reef committee. So, Lisa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is going to be a very brief presentation. Next slide. The ISFMP Artificial Reef Committee met jointly with the Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission February 28th through March 1st in New Orleans, Louisiana. We held discussions on the 2017 American Fisheries Society meeting, the Artificial Reef Symposium that was held there. The Commission served on the steering committee of that symposium. We also discussed the state of historic resource reviews and how that affects new permitting. BP-funded projects from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, state protocols for scuba diving and how they differ among states, and also how Delaware is collecting aerial flight data on their reefs. There was a guest presentation from NOAA regarding sea turtle considerations in reef module designs. Each state provided an update, and the next meeting will be hosted by the Atlantic States Commission in early 2019. The committee decided that they wanted to create a document compiling the state artificial reef monitoring protocols. Currently, if you want to see the protocols, you have to contact each state directly. So by putting them all together, we can aid in standardization of protocols for comparisons along the coast. Once we have that document compiled this year, next year we'd like to use this information to identify best practices, gaps in protocols, and make recommendations for monitoring. And we've also invited the Gulf states to participate in this document as well. Next, we have two new members. Christine Kittle is replacing Brad Ennis as the Florida representative, and Eric Schneider is replacing Chris DeCutis as the Rhode Island representative. Next. And as always, we welcome suggestions for any action items you would like. Each state is very, it varies across the states, but some states are very active in their artificial reef programs, but they're always looking to work collectively through the commission on different action items if you have anything that you'd like to see from them. So we welcome any suggestions that you have. If you don't, that's great. They're still doing their own thing in each state. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thanks, Lisa. John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lisa, did the committee talk about special management zones, and is that something that most states are going to, or is it still just kind of some states have them, some don't, for artificial reefs?
Some states are interested in moving that way. I know that South Carolina has them right now in certain areas, but Bob Martori, who's a representative, he was actually not at the meeting this time around. So for this committee in particular, each state is very different in how they approach artificial reefs and how they see the benefits of them, so it varies by state.
Steve Murphy.
Yeah, Lisa, we've been, and I brought this up a month or so ago at the division directors meeting, but I'm concerned with the discrepancies in various Army Corps districts and how this artificial reef permitting has taken place. We once had an extremely vibrant artificial reef program. We have 42 offshore reef sites. And we have been literally paralyzed for the past 2 years trying to permit new construction on these reefs. Now that work is going forward with the Corps and with National Marine Fisheries and Protected Resources through the Section 7 consultation. But we've probably lost significant funding from not only our General Assembly, but also from donations from fishing groups and everything. I know this has been an issue that's been addressed in South Carolina and also in Georgia. Is this really a problem across the country, or is it just region by region?
That's a great question. This comes up at almost every meeting. So Army Corps, each state works very differently with their Army Corps representative, and we've discussed having an Army Corps representative come to our meetings, but because they work so differently, one Army Corps representative wouldn't be able to speak for the entire coast or the coast plus the Gulf of Mexico, so we didn't see much benefit in bringing one in. We've thought about attempting to address these concerns with Army Corps, but there was some apprehension with the states for whom it's working really well. What the states like to do now is use this meeting that we have annually as a way to get together, see what's working, what's not working, provide advice to states where they're having more difficulties, but they're not sure how best to approach it without possibly hurting the states where it's actually going kind of well. So if you have suggestions, we're open to it. It is definitely an issue, and region by region, it works very differently.
Actually, a follow-up to that, Steve. With our recent reinstitution of the New York program, the Army Corps has been actually very, very good with this and very helpful. However, on a different issue on oyster harvest, we're running into that same problem. We've got a district right next to each other, then we got different sets of rules. So it's a concern I think we need to start looking into. If we're going to make measures consistent among the states and try to make our criteria the same, we shouldn't have to be getting a yes in one state and no in another state because the Corps is setting different rules. So I'm going to look into that because I think that's an important issue. David Pierce?
Yeah, Massachusetts has artificial reefs in our waters, and we're working with a recreational advisory panel that is focusing on, new artificial reefs to provide all the benefits that artificial reefs do provide. And I have, and my staff has reflected on the policy, the existing ASMFC policy for artificial reefs, and that's been very helpful. But if I have a suggestion, I think it's in the purview of your committee, Lisa. There are going to be forests of wind turbines eventually in offshore areas, and these forests they will provide opportunities for artificial reefs. At least there's been some discussion about that. That is part of the construction operations plans for the different areas, the different companies that will have these arrays. Perhaps there should be some requirement that BOEM could actually require relative to the construction of artificial reefs around those towers. So my suggestion is that your committee might want to delve into that particular issue to see if indeed there is a potential for artificial reefs within those leased areas, and if so, what sorts of requirements, what sorts of guidance should be given as to how those reefs should be constructed. I can see the potential for each company doing its own thing or being advised in different ways by different states about what they should do or could do to, again, create artificial reefs, since it's likely that commercial fishing may be impossible or not likely in many of these areas for a number of very, very good reasons. So artificial reefs, recreational fishing, that's my suggestion, that the committee take a look at this issue and see if you can actually offer up some advice to all the ASMFC states that are so intimately involved in reviewing construction operations plans right now, and those that will be offered up in the future by these companies.
Thank you, David. Other questions? Mel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a question, just a shameless plug, I guess, for the question was asked about special management zones. And yes, South Carolina, pretty much all of our reefs in federal waters are special management zones. But we have a unique situation where we actually have 3 artificial reefs that are special management zones for the purposes of stock enhancement only. It's basically they are there as spawning special management zones. Well, one is actually a marine protected area. It functions the same way. And these were all designated by the South Atlantic Council. So as artificial reefs kind of continue to be examined as fishery management tools, there are various ways you can use tools. The traditional method that we've always relied on is build the reef, fish the reef, build the reef, fish the reef. It enhances recreational fishing in our case, and it can be used for commercial purposes. But we've added this additional use, which is the reef is there for the purpose of building stocks. So, you know, as we kind of move into the future, we're certainly big promoters of that. We're real proud of our 3 sites there and the fact that we were able to do this with the cooperation and help. I mean, really, the South Atlantic Council provided the regulatory authority for us to be able to do that. But it's something to consider as you move forward in the future, different states. It's just since we're here with a group from the Atlantic coast, but it's just something to think about. But you can actually build, and you can properly regulate through the proper level of regulation, in this case, South Atlantic Council, you can build reefs for the purpose of rebuilding stocks. And then it kind of gets to this some about, you know, will folks worry about, do reefs aggregate, do they produce? Well, yes, they do both, but you can actually build a reef specifically for the purpose of rebuilding your stocks. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Okay, Marty, you get the last shot here.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Question for Lisa. So PRFC has 2 artificial reef sites, and over the last 20 years, we've had 2 chances to get materials of opportunity to place on those sites. So when we get a chance, we take advantage of it, and we may have another one coming in the form of a bridge that's being torn down about 40, 50 miles downriver from where we are today. A bridge I cross twice a day and take my life into my own hands every time I do, so I'll be glad when it does come down. So the question I have for you is, there used to be a document, guidelines for inspection and of materials. I thought the Gulf states created it back in 2004 or 2005. I was just curious, when we get to the point where we have discussions on what material is suitable, is that still the default document that all the states are using to ascertain whether materials are appropriate? Thanks.
So we're working on updating that document now, and it's been in the process of being updated since I became the coordinator for this committee. The Gulf States is working on that, and we discuss it at every meeting. When you need that document, contact me, and I'll let you know if we have a newer version out or not. And if we don't, I would default to the older one.
And Marty, just so you know, the start of our reef program again, we're actually using a bridge, so we have criteria. Be glad to share with you for lack of, you know, anything else. And worked pretty well, I think, in terms of what we're going to put in the water. Okay, we're going to move along now to the Law Enforcement Committee. Met this week, and Mark Robson's going to give us an update on the committee. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had a very productive meeting this week and provided a written summary of the meeting, so you can refer to that at your leisure for more details as to our discussions. There were just a few things that I wanted to highlight. First of all, we did cover a number of different species issues in our discussions. The Lobster Management Board heard some of our thoughts regarding the ropeless fishing technologies. We had a pretty thorough review of what's out there and what's being discussed in terms of ropeless fishing techniques. And we obviously highlighted some of the enforcement concerns that technology might bring in the future. We also went through and reviewed with staff and the LEC the Rhode Island winter flounder proposal for consistent state waters regulations, and we provided input to the Winter Flounder Board regarding law enforcement issues, particularly with regard to consistent regulations between state and federal waters, and the issue of the aggregate weekly limits and how that can be managed to still provide some effective law enforcement protection. We also heard a briefing from staff regarding the shortfin mako NOAA emergency rule, and after discussing that with Kirby Roots-Murdy, we provided some input to staff regarding the support among the LEC for whatever actions that the Commission might take to develop or to look for complementary regulations between state and federal waters for that fishery. So those were three significant species issues that we dealt with. There was one item that I wanted to go to the next slide. The Law Enforcement Committee has a number of members who have been intimately involved in coordinating joint enforcement agreements with NOAA. For those of you, I'm sure most of you are familiar with that program, but the Cooperative Enforcement Program is set up to provide federal funding to state agency enforcement arms in the conservation and protection of marine fisheries, particularly at the federal waters level and for federally managed species. This program has been in place for about 18 years, and a number of the members of the LEC had heard that there was a good possibility, or at least it's being discussed in the 2019 federal budget, that that program may be cut significantly or perhaps completely. There's enough concern among the LEC members at our meeting that we are requesting to you as policy board that you take a look at this issue, and if there, in whatever manner you deem appropriate, if you could express support for continued funding of that joint enforcement program. It's really a vital program for many of the state enforcement arms. Provides additional funding for hours on the water by state officers. It also provides a significant amount of funding for vessels and equipment that otherwise state agencies would not be able to acquire and manage and use. So we are making that request to you as the LEC committee. And that completes my report, Mr. Chairman.
You want to go back? Tony just has some follow-up to that, so Tony, go ahead.
Just before those questions to Mark, staff has been, Bob and Deke have been on the Hill, and during their discussions on the Hill with staffers, they have emphasized the need for this program and fully funding the program and how important it is to the states for enforcement of fishery regulations. So that is ongoing currently and will continue to occur.
Thanks, Tony. Eric Reed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about this topic for sure. And just to put some numbers on it, I think the JEA agreement would allow about 200 and some odd enforcement agents. Without it, you've got 6 for the coast. I think that's pretty close to being the reality of it. I know at the Mid-Atlantic Council we've had a discussion about it. The New England Council we've had a discussion about it. But those two bodies are constrained in their ability to provide comment unless they're asked for comment or to lobby in any way, shape, or form. So I think we're a little bit more flexible, and if it means us sending something to someone, I think we should do that.
Thanks, Eric. Tom Foti.
Eric and I are on the same page. We would not have law enforcement without that money. If we think about the awards that we were giving out over law enforcement over the last 25 years, it would be most of us were from joint operations with the feds, and we need to continue that stream. So I think it behooves us to write a letter to the Secretary of Commerce and basically reiterate that point. I think it's also incumbent on all the states to write the same type of letter. So I don't know if you want to maybe make that an emotion or just basically a comment.
I think if we're going to do a letter, we probably can just do that by, we can just agree to do this without a motion. But let me hear a couple of comments. And I am pretty much in agreement. This is, a big issue for New York and all the states. So, David Pierce.
Well, I was going to make a motion to, if not needed, I won't make it. But clearly, the letter should strongly support continued and expanded funding for the NOAA Cooperative Enforcement Agreement. This is a very important agreement, very important necessary funds provided to the states to enforce federal rules, of course, and also to enhance state waters enforcement. So cutting funding makes absolutely no sense in light of every state's understanding of the amount of enforcement that occurs right now that, frankly, is inadequate. And I won't get into the specifics as it pertains to Massachusetts and elsewhere, but in light of the information provided to us by the National Marine Fisheries Service, by GARFO, regarding a variety of illegal activities and enforcement resources that are not there, to cut the funding, it's so counterproductive. So.
Thanks, David. David Borden?
And make this really brief because quite a few people have said what I wanted to say, but in terms of the national support for this program, there are 3,500 agents nationwide that rely on the funding from this source. So it's a big deal in terms of protecting the resources around the country. So I'd also add that the LEC did an excellent job of fleshing out the reasons, so I think it'll be a fairly easy task to put together a compelling letter. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Okay, we're running light on time, so Richie.
Thank you. Just quickly, I think if we include also the efficiency to the federal government of this program in that they don't have to own a bunch of vessels. You know, the vessels are provided by all the states, and it would be insane to think they would go and replace all those vessels they now have access to.
Thanks, Richie. Let me go to Bob because I think maybe you can describe a way forward and maybe we can move on. Go, Bob.
Yeah, just very quickly. Everyone's in agreement, it seems like. But, you know, Deke and I, as Tony mentioned, have already reached out to a number of offices, including some appropriation staff on the Hill. I know Maine and New Hampshire have talked to some of their delegation on Capitol Hill as well as about the importance of this, and others may have also. And this issue also came up at the state directors meeting that we had about a month ago down in Charleston, and Pat Kelleher, among others, delivered a pretty clear message to Chris Oliver that this is an important issue and funding for this is important. So even with all of that, I think a letter, you know, strongly worded letter based on, you know, the comments around the table, I think is still holds a lot of value.
Okay, so we'll proceed with that with a letter and still encourage the states to write individual ones. I think the more we have, the stronger the argument's going to be. So, okay, we're going to move on. We're fortunate now to have Kelly Dennett from headquarters, and she's going to talk to us, give us a little update on the MREP update on the transition to the fishing effort survey and calibration process, which we're all anxiously awaiting all the great news from that. Kelly.
Yeah, everybody's favorite four-letter word, right? Next slide, please. So I know that we are constrained by time, so I'm going to move somewhat quickly so that we can have as much time for your questions as possible. So I'm really going to just try and focus on the highlights, but as I'm going through the slides, if there's anything you want me to go back to after we get to the questions, just let me know. So this is just a quick reminder that total catch is based on effort, and our catch rate, our effort survey was the CHTS, the Coastal Household Telephone Survey. It is now the Fishing Effort Survey, the FES, the mail-based survey, which I'm going to go into more detail on. And then APIS is what is giving you the catch rate. Next slide, please. You guys know good and well what all goes into assessing the health of stocks. It's a variety of data streams. The point of this slide is just that the FES and APIS data is not the only stream that influences stock assessments. Next slide. So like I mentioned, the Fishing Effort Survey as of January of 2018 is the only effort survey that we're running. It has replaced the Coastal Household Telephone Survey. And the Fishing Effort Survey, the FES, uses Postal Service records combined with state licensing information in order to determine who is targeted for the mail-based survey. And we believe that based on this, it's providing more accurate estimates. Next slide. So the big reasons why a mail-based survey is more accurate is that we're reaching more anglers. In this day and age, I'm sure many of you, like me, get calls on your cell phone from a number that you don't recognize, and you press that nice red button to decline that call. With the mail-based survey, we believe we're getting to more anglers, and we're not having that issue of not connecting with people via phone. In addition, the survey is getting into the right hands. With the phone-based survey, it was whoever answered the phone, which may or may not have been the actual angler in the household. And so now with the mail-based survey, the survey can get to the person in the house who would be fishing. In addition, the mail-based survey is providing more complete answers. You know how sometimes when you're on the phone, you get a question, you're feeling compelled you got that awkward silence, so you're trying to come up with an answer as quick as you can. Now with the mail-based survey, folks can take their time. They can provide an answer to the response, look at their calendar if they need to, all of that good stuff. And the result is that our response rate is 3 times higher than it was, and this is consistent with some efforts that have been underway at Fish and Wildlife Survey as well, where they've been testing moving their big fish and game survey to mail-based approach, and they're also seeing approximately a 3 times increase in the response rate based on that mail-based survey. Next slide. So the FES has been extensively tested, peer-reviewed. There was a National Academy of Sciences review that said exactly what the quote is up there. It's a major improvement over the CHTS. Next slide. You guys are familiar, over the last 3 years, we've had a transition plan in place. The commission has been very active in participating in that group. It's composed of the councils, representatives from states, representatives from the commissions, folks from NOAA Fisheries. And we developed a 3-year plan because we knew that moving to this new effort survey would be a major disruption to fisheries if we didn't do it in a very thoughtful way. And so that's what's been happening. Is over the last 3 years, we've had the side-by-side benchmarking. We're now at the point where we have the calibration model for the FES, and later this summer we'll have the actual data to be incorporated into stock assessments. Next slide. So I'm sure you've heard a lot of previously about what is the actual scale of the changes. So this gives you the overarching information, which is on average for private boat, it's about 3 times higher. Effort is about 3 times higher under the FES, and about 5 times higher on shore-based. And I need to emphasize a couple points on this slide. The first is it varies by mode, state, and wave. So these are just the overarching averages across species, so there are going to be differences. And it also does not mean necessarily that overfishing has been happening. As you guys know, there's a number of factors that go into stock assessments. It's going to depend largely on what is the proportion of the fishery that is recreational, what proportion within that is shore-based, which is private boat. And I also want to emphasize here that this is not related to the for-hire or charter surveys. The FES is specific only to the private angler. Next. So I'll just quickly, these next 2 slides are on the specific calibration models, so I'm going to move through them a little bit quickly so we can get to what I think is the more substantive part. So the FES calibration model has been peer-reviewed. It passed its peer review. It showed that rough increase that I just showed you on the previous slide. And it does not indicate that there has been a recent increase in effort. It's actually showing that there has been higher effort over the entire time series. Next slide. We put the APIS adjustment in here as well because I wanted to make sure that everyone understands that both adjustments to the data will be happening as part of the new recalibrated data that will be coming out this summer. You guys are already intimately familiar with the changes in APIS. Just know that the peer review was held just about a month ago. It was overall reviewed well. I think there's a couple things we have to follow up on, but it's moving forward as well. Next slide. So now where the rubber meets the road. So on July 2nd, we plan to have the recalibrated data, so the data that's incorporated the changes based on FES and APIS recalibrations available. And that information will then be fed into stock assessments. Next slide, please. So you guys know we can't do stock assessments for every single stock all at once. One of the main objectives for that transition team was to work together to come up with suggestions for how we prioritize, and then those were worked through the respective regional approaches, the NRCC for the Northeast, and then I forget what the acronym is for the comparable one in the Southeast, to prioritize stock assessments. So those will be occurring starting this fall. The 2 biggest ones are striped bass, and summer flounder has a benchmark this fall as well that you guys are aware of. So as a result of those stock assessments, we'll have 3 key issues that are no doubt going to be discussed as part of all of this. The first is stock status. So like I mentioned, just because the FES numbers are higher does not necessarily mean that overfishing has been occurring, and it will be dependent on what those stock assessments show us for the councils in this body to take action and consider whether there's any changes to stock status. Annual catch limits, similar issue. Once we have the results of those stock assessments, the management bodies, councils, and this group will be responsible for making decisions on those catch limits, whether there needs to be any changes upwards or downwards based on those stock assessments. And then the last part is allocation decisions. We've been grappling here at the Commission with allocation decisions repeatedly here over the last year or so, and I expect with this new data there will be additional conversations around that both here and at the councils. Next slide. So one of the points we've wanted to be very clear, in particular with anglers, is all of our ACLs for 2018 have been set using CHTS data. So we need to make sure that when we're comparing catch at the end of the year that is so far being calculated based on FES, that we have the ability to convert that back to CHTS, what I'm going to call currency, so that what we're calculating as catch at the end of the year is being compared to a catch limit that was established in the same currency. And so that is the point of this slide, is that our FES calibration and the APIS calibration allow us to move back and forth so that when we are getting the effort survey information this year from the FES, we can convert that to CHTS and allow those accurate comparisons. Next slide. So this is laying out over the next 3 years. Like I mentioned, we can't do all of the stock assessments at once, so they're going to go in a tiered fashion, essentially. The big ones this fall, like I mentioned, are striped bass and a summer flounder, and then the results from those will hopefully be able to be incorporated into management for 2019. In 2019, we'll have another slew of stock assessments that will be conducted to incorporate the additional information and the recalibrated data, and then that will inform management measures as we move forward, and we'll move through stepwise until we can get the recalibrated data in place and through stock assessments for all the stocks. And until the stock assessment is done, we will continue to use the calibration in order to make sure that we're comparing catch versus catch limit in the same currency. So we won't be establishing ACLs in the FES currency until after there's been a stock assessment. I know I went really fast. That was just for time, and I want to make sure that you guys had an opportunity to ask any questions, and I'll do my best.
Thanks, Kelly. Questions? Tom Foti.
Not as a question, it was a comment. When I heard this presentation a couple of weeks ago down here in this almost the same room when the rec summit, I looked at it and I says, almost fell off the chair because I said, boy, this is a breath of fresh air. I mean, this is what we needed to happen a long time ago when we basically do, when we get numbers of fish. This would have solved New York's problem in 2001 and 2003 when it came to 2004, because they started picking up more recreational anglers, and their growth of it went from 400,000 to 600,000 to 900,000. It wasn't that they had picked up more anglers, it just had better data on the anglers out there fishing. And we should have adjusted the stocks and quota for New York at that time. That's what I suggested, but I got overridden. I think we should write a letter in support of this because it really handles what we've been all concerned in the recreational community about. It'd be nice to send a letter to the Secretary of Commerce to basically say this is in the right direction, because it really is. I mean, as most of us know, we've been afraid that, again, when we wind up with bigger numbers, they're just going to say you're overfishing, and this is not what's going to be happening under this proposal. So I'm happy to hear it. I said it to Dave and Kelly at the last meeting I was with when they presented this. Job well done.
Thanks, Tom. Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Kelly, for the nice presentation, kind of laid it all out. The one question I had when the peer review was done on the effort recalibration, we were working with 2 of the 3 years of information, and so my question is, have they rerun the analysis with the 3rd year? Did it change any of the effects in the model? Any big differences when they, if and when they added that 3rd year?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. They did add the third year, and as best I've understood it, there were not any major changes. But I will follow up with Dave to make sure that I have not mischaracterized that.
Adam Nowalski.
Thank you. Are there any general recommendations that are going to be issued as part of this for what rec management might do? Specifically, we talk about measures that have been put in place in the past that, quite frankly, now that we have what we think is a better handle on effort and catch, quite frankly, those regulations may not be applicable today, may not have been appropriate in the past time series. So is anyone looking at that and making a recommendation what recreational management might do as some steps in moving forward using this information?
Hey, Adam. Yeah, thanks for that question. The plan is that all of that data will be available in July, and I think that'll be the kickoff when people will people, meaning the councils and the commissions, will start digging into the data to think about and look at what changes might be appropriate, and then ultimately that will be informed by the stock assessments and what those stock assessments using the recalibrated data show.
Other questions? Mel Bell?
Again, just a comment. I have the privilege of being on the transition team as a representative for the South Atlantic Council, and I'm pretty much just a fly on the wall. But I would commend Dave and Kelly and the whole team for this. Has been a lot of work, and they've done a great job. And I can tell you from my perspective, from just kind of listening in and following the process, I mean, they're doing a great job. This is going to be a better product. We're going to have better data, and ultimately, I view myself as kind of a customer. I'm an end user for what happens with the data. So as a customer and having the privilege of just kind of watching this whole process, I can tell you that they are really doing a good job, and they do need to be commended.
Okay, I think, well, thanks, Kelly, for that update. I think everyone's looking anxiously to July and see how this all works out, but I think we've got pretty good agreement around that. We're moving in the right direction, so thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay, we're on to other business. We've got a few things we're going to do some brief updates on. First update on Shad, and Jeff Kipp's going to give us a little background on that. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just here to give an update on the American Shad Stock Assessment process. The Shad and River Herring Technical Committee and Stock Assessment Subcommittee met March 5th through the 8th in Baltimore for a data workshop. Where we reviewed and discussed the available data sets for the assessment. Those data sets, the deadline for submitting them is June 1st, and our next planned in-person meeting is tentatively for October of 2018. So if there are any questions on that assessment and progress, I can take those now.
Any questions for Jeff? Okay, seeing none, Mike's going to come up and give us an update on horseshoe crabs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A data workshop was held for horseshoe crab in February of this year. The assessment workshop will be held next week. With that particular assessment, there are over 100 indices that are being evaluated for use in the varying regions and the sex-specific nature that a lot of those indices can be for horseshoe crab. So with that type of workload, there is a likely probability that we will be having a second assessment workshop. We're going to confirm that with the SAS and kind of go forward from there. That was included in the original timeline. We did include a little bit of wiggle room for a second assessment workshop. So we are still on track for a peer review by the end of this year. With the presentation of final assessment report and peer review report in February of 2019. So if anyone has any questions, I can take those.
Any questions for Mike? Tom Foti.
Just a comment, one of the proposals that BOEMA is looking at for windmills and one of the private firms that put their proposed area in the sanctuary for the horseshoe crabs. So we should be paying attention to what they're basically proposing. But that was the area we set aside to be a sanctuary, and that's where they want to put the windmills. So it's becoming a real concern no matter the placement of all the windmills, because sometimes they basically they don't listen to the federal agencies and they don't listen to the state agencies, the people that are putting these plans together. And the kind of state agencies basically, because of what I've heard up and down the coast, is they give comments of where fisheries areas are, and they've been kind of ignored. So we need to be conscious of that fact and basically work harder to make sure that the fisheries issues are concerned and where the placement of windmills go.
Thanks, Tom. Jace? Oh, okay. Any other questions for Mike? Okay, seeing none, thanks, Mike. We got one more thing that jumped on at the last minute. We had a letter from the Lobster Board, and Pat Kelleher is going to lead us through that. Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At yesterday's Lobster Management Board, there was a review and discussion in regards to the LEC's meeting yesterday as it pertained to ropeless fishing in the lobster fishery. After a discussion with the Lobster Management Board, a motion was passed to request that a letter be sent to GARFO in regards to the concerns related to ropeless fishing. From an enforceability standpoint, it was clear from the Law Enforcement Committee that our current rules that we have on the books for the conservation of lobsters would not be enforceable with the use of ropeless fishing. There was further discussions in regards to future technologies, and we don't want to dismiss the fact that in the future something may become available in regards to this technology. But at the end of the day, there was that motion that was passed with the recommendation to send a letter to GARFO, and I believe probably Mike, I think it was pertaining to sending it to Mike Pentney in particular.
Sounds like a good suggestion. Any comments or questions for Pat on that? Okay, Bob, we'll add it to the list of letters that you're going to crack out. Okay. All right, so we will do that. We will craft a letter from the commission on that ropeless fishing issue for the lobster. We're at the end of the meeting. Unless there's other business to come before the board, we'll take a motion to adjourn. Okay, we're adjourned. So we don't have any issues to take up for the business session outside of approving the minutes. I think we can put that off until the August meeting, and we'll convene the Summer Flounders Cup and Black Sea Bass Board in roughly 10 minutes. Just give us some time to